right, we'll get this next one going. He is very aware that he stands between you and lunch. It's the unfortunate timing of the person who presents right before lunch. But it's better than being right after lunch because everyone's going to be in a food coma and not paying attention at all. So I'm going to read from his bio here. Richard Rieben is a partner and high trust practice lead at Linford & Company, where he leads audits and assessments covering various frameworks including high trust, SOC, CMMC, and NIST. With over 20 years of experience in IT and cybersecurity and various certifications, including PMP, CISSP, we'll skip over those.
Yeah,
Richard is skilled in helping growing organizations achieve their information security and compliance goal. I also want to say, I know him personally. I've known him for a couple years. He's a great friend, great presenter, and I'm very thrilled to have you here. Came all the way from Dayton, Ohio, so just thank you so much. I honestly appreciate you supporting this organization.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. I've known Matt for a number of years. As you said, we do work with CompTIA together. We both do exam development where we help write and develop content for the portfolio of CompTIA information security exams. So if anybody's ever interested in that, if you are really good at taking exams or you like writing exam content, come talk to me about how you can be a subject matter expert with CompTIA if that's something that would be of interest to you. So let's go ahead and get started. Like Matt said, I know that I stand between you and lunch, so I will end on time for sure. What we're going to be covering today is the audit, a significant emotional event. It's a great way of defining how a lot of people look at audits. They can be a stressful activity, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about that. But a little bit more about my background. When Matt said that I've been in IT and cyber for 20 years, I was actually in IT doing system admin and network admin work for about 10 years. And then I was fortunate enough to get an opportunity to switch over to the cyber world about 10 years ago. And I've been a cybersecurity auditor for about 9 years. I do focus on SOC 2, high trust, and then also NIST, FedRAMP, CMC right now. But I also have experience as a QSA and any number of other audit frameworks out there. And again, my experience and my background is in relation to cybersecurity audits. I know nothing about financial auditing. I can't do anything. I don't even do my own taxes. So I'm a partner with Linford & Company. I am truly blessed to have a job that I absolutely love. I get to work with dozens of clients every year performing a variety of audits and assessments. And it's been a journey for me getting to where I am now in terms of the role that I have. And I definitely went through some of those challenges earlier on in my career where I was thinking, am I really enjoying what I'm doing? And it took me a number of times to really think about that and go back to some of what we talked about with the mind hacking in terms of figuring out what do I really want to do, what will make me be satisfied, and then making changes in my life and in my career to get me to that point. Some of my biggest hobbies, I'm an amateur radio operator. I do a lot of that stuff. And my call sign is KE4WLE. I'm also an avid camper and a hiker. Now, what are you doing here? What do we do here? Just out of curiosity, are there any other auditors in the audience? Okay.
I just went through a whole bunch.
Yeah, that was my follow-up question is who's been audited? Who's here because they want to know about being audited?
ISO, SOC 2, FedRAMP,
Yeah.
medium, FedRAMP high.
Yeah, so you have some experience with that. So definitely really what I'm trying to do is kind of talk through the process. And I'd love to talk about audits. If I didn't, I probably wouldn't be here. So if you have any questions at all, I'd be happy to entertain them. You don't have to be a client of mine to be able to get feedback and support on your own activities. So I encourage you to reach out to me if you'd like. So the first step we're going to talk about is why do we do audits? Why do companies have audits performed? Why does this even exist? We're going to talk about how dental hygiene is associated with your audit. And then we're going to talk about why are there so many stressors that audits induce. And then we'll talk about how we can relieve some of that stress. And then we'll wrap it up with some success factors that I've seen over the years as an auditor. So first of all, we engage in audits as a mechanism to demonstrate some sort of compliance. In most cases, actually I'll break it into two primary channels that we follow when we talk to potential clients. They're saying, we need an audit because we have a contract that says we need an audit. Or they are saying, we need an audit because we want to be better. Now, I'm not going to voice an opinion too much on which of those routes is better than the other. I think either one is very noble. The one I don't want to hear, ever, is I'm just looking to check a box. If I'm talking to a prospective client about that, that pretty much ends our conversation because that client wouldn't want me as an auditor because that client is not interested in continual improvement as an organization. So now in effect though, there's a couple main points to make here. First of all, audits provide a level of assurance to the consumer of the audit report. So for example, whether that be the organization itself or whether it is the clients of that organization. So for example, SaaS providers, why do they go through cybersecurity audits? Well, we go through FedRAMP to prove that we meet a certain level of security application within our program. And you are using that as an alternative to having everybody knock on your door and do their own audit. So for example, Azure, AWS, GCP. Does every client go audit them? No, because they couldn't sustain that, simply. The way that it works is they hire an auditor. That auditor comes and truly represents all of their clients and the work that they do. So for example, I'm in Toronto next week to do a data center audit for a client that I've worked with for a number of years. And when I go into Canada, which can be sometimes problematic from a why are you here, are you stealing Canadian jobs perspective when I'm talking to Border Patrol, I say I am here to inspect a data center on behalf of my client's clients. And they say, oh, okay, as long as you're not taking any jobs back with you, you'll be fine. So bottom line is, they're being audited once so they can turn around and hand that audit report to their customers. The other point here is that continual improvement factor. That's a major reason why organizations go through audits. While most of my clients are going through an audit so they can take that report and hand it off to somebody, a lot of them are also doing it as a measure of continual improvement. And the clients that do best typically are the ones that are using the audit. Sure, we get the report, we hand it off, but more importantly, we improve along the way. They say, Richard, don't go easy on us. We want you to really press us and stress us out so that, not emotionally, but in terms of, stretching the abilities of their security program. They want to understand where their weaknesses are so that they can improve. Now, how is an audit like a visit to the dentist? From a career standpoint, I never really thought about this, how dentists feel about going to work in the morning. How do you think they feel? To go to work and be surrounded by people who don't really want to see you, but they know that they need to see you. Because hopefully they know that after my visit with this dentist, it might be hours or days later, I will feel better, I will be better, and I'll be in better shape. It's very similar with the work that we do as auditors. People aren't always excited to see us come. They're very apprehensive for the visit, and they're unsure about the outcome. But they know that if everything goes right, that they'll be better off for it. And my goal is to support that. So we feel very similar to that. Now, why are audits stressful? Any ideas from the group?
What if you screwed up once?
What if you screwed up once and the auditor finds that one time? Which happens. Go ahead.
I swear I did all my onboarding due diligence, except for this one guy.
Yeah.
That one time, yeah.
That happens.
It can be really frustrating when you work really hard to do something great and then have somebody professionally instead of come and point out exactly the date you don't.
Yeah, that's true.
Tell us one more. When you think the auditor doesn't actually understand what you do.
Yeah. So I had a certain experience this week where a client, we were on a call doing a technical scoping call, where we get into the weeds of the technical underpinnings of their environment. And I was asking about the servers and the clusters and database and APIs and stuff like that. And he was like, well, why don't I just send you the inventory? And I was like, well, that would be pointless because I'll have an inventory of servers and I'll have no idea what they really do. And I won't have the context behind them. But to get back to this, the most significant thing that causes the stress related with an audit assessment or whatever it will be ties to the comments that you've made, which is the uncertainty. You're going into something without a guaranteed outcome. Now, the challenge there is that can the outcome of an audit impact you? Can it impact your career? Can it impact your company? Absolutely. Now the challenge there is, a good friend of mine says, if you don't like the cost of compliance, imagine what the cost of non-compliance can be. So as bad as it is for an auditor to find that one time that it wasn't done, imagine if there's something else that's significant that an auditor does find before the bad guys find it. You know, when I talk to people about what I do professionally, I often say my job is to help companies find the things they don't want bad guys to find first. And if I manage to find them first, I've done a good job. So go along with that, when we're talking about the dentist analogy, it works so well. There's so many aspects of it that work. A mentor of mine once said, in regards to an audit, if it's not at least a little bit uncomfortable, I'm not really doing my job. My thought on that is if you go into an audit and you come out of it or going through it, and if it's feeling like a relaxing back rub, it probably isn't a very good audit. It's probably what we often right now call in the industry a fake audit, where it's skimming the surface, it's not really going into any detail, and it's really not achieving the goals we've talked about, which is demonstrating assurance, identifying potential areas of weakness, and helping the organization improve. So, what can be done to improve the experience within your organization? Well, the first step is to try to define the symptoms that you're dealing with as an organization. Because every organization is different. They all have a different fingerprint. That's why we do things like technical scoping calls, because I want to understand the fingerprint of that environment before I just start blindly asking for evidence, before I just toss something over the wall. And spending the time to get to know what are the factors involved in your environment can help you along the way. Because a big part of it, the people element of this is huge. Just like in John's talk and the talks we've heard so far, the people element of auditing is very significant. Now, the things I'm going to share, I've observed over the course of 9 years, doing hundreds of audits, assessments, gap analysis, engagement, things like that. It's more of a menu for you to consider rather than a checklist of things you need to meet. So for example, if you go back and you think about maybe some of the audit experiences you've had, or as you prepare for an audit, and you look at these things and you say, oh, I've got that, that's not a problem. Oh, but this one over here, that's a problem. Then you should probably spend your time focusing on those, because you'll get your maximum outcome out of your biggest areas of weakness. Okay. So, will any of you be surprised to hear that the first suggestion I have has absolutely nothing to do with technical aspects of an audit? It's project management. In terms of reducing the stress and reducing the uncertainty and making the process go smoother, one of the #1 techniques to apply is effective project management. Now, to go along with that, thinking about some of the most successful clients that I've worked with. When I say successful, I'm not talking about clients that don't have issues during an audit. They don't have exceptions. Is that they get through the audit process cleanly and efficiently in a way that doesn't waste people's time, reduces uncertainty, and creates a positive process. They have people involved in the audit that are strong project managers. Often one person that's a strong project manager. And that person functions as a pivot point, because they are the cat herder that we just saw on the previous slide. And I found that by applying strong project management, you smooth out the process and you create an environment where everybody understands what they need to do, when they need to do it, and what's expected of them. Because what's one of the most stressful things for us in our careers? It's not knowing those things, not knowing what we need to do, when we need to do it, and what is expected of us. The next one that gets a little closer to actual auditing and technical capabilities is conducting a quality readiness assessment. So for example, going into FedRAMP, as you mentioned, massive audit engagement. Would you do that without doing a readiness assessment? Or do you just yell YOLO and have at it?
Oh, no, not that.
there's differences between readiness assessments and gap assessments, or whatever, gap analysis, whatever you want to call them. There's ones that are inquiry-based, where you sit down with somebody that's operating off of a checklist, and they say, do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? Without any awareness of your technical environment or your information security program. They're just asking for the things that they think they're going to need to see. But the problem with that is it's not taking your individual environment into account. Now, a good quality readiness assessment is going to do a couple things. Beyond just determining whether or not a gap exists, it's going to be based on inquiry and evidence review. Now, it doesn't mean it's the same evidence that's going to be required during the actual audit. But say, for example, if I sit down with HR and I say, do all of your new hires complete security awareness training? Do you do background checks for all of your new hires? And HR says, yeah, of course we do. And then I say, okay, prove that. Show me a recent example of that. Now, we don't go look at every single one, because at some point we do have to assume that people are managing their own things and keeping an eye on that. The other thing that the gap assessment needs to include is a process where you're getting not only a list of those gaps that are identified during that process, but also suggestions for remediation. You know, what is the expectation that you need to get to? If you're here, what does here look like? And if you're working with someone and they gave you a list of gaps, but they don't tell you what those remediations might need to be, you might not be working with the right partner that's truly going to help you in the process. The other part that's important there is those the scoping discussions. When I bring on a new client, there are two conversations I always have. First one is a product walkthrough, where I sit down and I have them give me a walkthrough of the product or service as if I was a prospective client of theirs. I just want to understand at a high level. I want to see the app, I want to see the product, whatever it is, and we're going to talk through it so that I can understand what are the moving parts, who uses this, and what do they use it for. And then after that, now that I have a high level understanding, I'll turn around and I'll say, okay, now we're ready to have a technical call. This is where I get the engineers, the developers on a call, and I say, okay, walk me through all these things. So the process that we talked about earlier with scoping out a pen test, very similar to that, where I say, what kind of servers do you have? What kind of databases do you have? What type of cloud services do you use? Who hosts your DNS? Who does your email security? All those different types of things. And as those are being answered, we're going off on little tangents, but not too far. Just enough so that when I start looking at evidence and inventories and policies, I can see the picture without just blindly assuming what's out there. Now, management support and prioritization. Audits that don't have management support and prioritization will not go well. Why is that?
They have that security culture.
First of all, it's a good indicator of the security culture. So that's a red flag. But the biggest reason is that when you get into it and you start asking for evidence, you're not going to get it because everybody's going to say, I'm busy working on this other thing because management hasn't made it a priority. Now, that doesn't mean that management needs to be deeply involved in every aspect of the audit. But what's typically very helpful is management sends out an email or in a meeting or something like that. They say, hey, we're starting a FedRAMP audit. We're starting a SOC 2 audit. Here's our auditors. Here's who is in charge from our side. If this person asks you for something, you need to follow up. You need to prioritize that. And if you have questions about priority, you need to escalate that. That's very important. The next thing is subject matter expert involvement. Clients often struggle with this area. Typically, we try to encourage smaller meetings for a couple of reasons. First of all, huge meetings with lots of people are very inefficient. Huge meetings with lots of people are very expensive. Now, they're expensive to us because they will be less efficient. They are expensive to my client because they are consuming the hours of all the people on that call, when realistically, I don't need 90% of them. Now, if I need to go talk to the engineer, the DBA, whoever, or a developer, the product manager, I can set a separate call with that person. typically speaking, the way that we do it is we say, hey, these are the things that we're going to be looking at. Let's do a review of the evidence, and then, we need to have a specific call with product and someone who knows the development and deployment pipeline very well. Then I let them go figure out who that is. They line up a call, and I use just that person's time. Now, if we need to go back out and talk to somebody else, we can do that. But those huge meetings are just a really bad idea. So knowing how and when to involve your subject matter experts is very important. Now, like John was talking about earlier, one of the things is making things easy. What was John's goal with backdoors and breaches? It was to make it stupid easy. And one of the same things we like to do is make communication and collaboration stupid easy. Because if you make that easy for everybody, it's going to make the entire thing more efficient. People will be more likely to ask questions, they'll be more likely to be engaged, and you're going to have a more positive outcome. Now, what enables that? Well, a big part of that is the right tool set. Have you ever had an opportunity or a situation at work where you're responsible for doing something, but you're just using the wrong tools? And you find that you spend 90% of your time working with the tool and 10% of your time actually getting something done. How does that feel? We had a situation recently where it happens. We had a client that says, this is how we want to do the audit, these are the tools we want to use. Our typical response is to say, okay, we'll do what you want. We're a boutique audit firm. So we tailor our process to fit the needs of our clients. Now, if they don't prescribe what they want to do, we will use our tool sets. We use two different tools primarily to do our audits. One is for very small, very simple audit engagements. The other is for larger, more complex audit engagements, because each tool has different benefits to it. This one over here, stupid simple. I don't need to train you on it. You literally just log in. You can see what you need to do. The back and forth is super easy, but the feature set is very limited. It doesn't support multiple audit frameworks really easily. It doesn't allow us to tailor our approach to fit that. So we have another tool set that we use on those larger engagements that allows us to map multiple frameworks together. It has more automation, dashboards, and reporting, things that this client doesn't care about and doesn't need. This client wants those things and they need that in their environment. Bottom line is those spreadsheets and shared folders are absolutely the devil. If you get into an audit engagement and the firm you're working with is talking about doing that, again, you may have the wrong partner. Speaking of selecting the right partner, you need to spend time. Now, the other thing I'll acknowledge right here, many of us at the more technical level within our careers, we might not be the ones picking the auditor. That's fine. In that case, you can do what you can do. But if you ever find yourself in a situation where you are part of the process for selecting an audit firm, I would strongly suggest that you do a couple of things. First of all, make sure you're talking to the people that are actually going to do your audit. Don't just talk to the salesperson. Don't talk to the person that tells you how things are going to be. Talk to one of the people that actually does it within the firm. And get an understanding of these things. How do they approach these things within their audit practice? Our approach within our firm, again, is very flexible. We fit the needs of our client, but at the same time, we also acknowledge that we are not the audit firm for everybody. So I want to make sure that my clients are finding the right partner for them. If that's not us, that's fine by me. One of the biggest challenges that some clients typically have is they get promises about how things are going to be during the audit, but then when they get handed over to operations doesn't seem to have been involved in these conversations. I have a client in South Africa. When he went through the process of talking to a firm, he was told that he would have a resource in Europe. Well, when they assigned his auditor for his engagement, guess where his auditor lived? California. Anybody want to guess what that time zone difference is? It's like 12 hours. And my client is the type of client that they work local hours. They work 9 to 5 South Africa time. So for me to work with them, I just do a call with them at 8 a.m., which is 3 p.m. their time. And that was a great example, and by the way, that chain continued. He had that problem, and then he couldn't get people to email him back, and then he ended up working with some offshore resources that knew nothing technically and were working off of a checklist. And at that point, he emailed me, he's like, hey, Richard, can we talk about this again? Do you guys have room for me on your schedule? Now, last point here is agree on expectations and timeline. Now that means not only between your audit firm and you, but also internally within the organization. So for example, if you are managing an audit, or if you are providing evidence for an audit, how long do you have to provide that evidence? What's the SLA that you're going to have internally? You know, typically speaking, when we're working with our clients, we say 2 weeks is about reasonable. If I ask you for some evidence, it's reasonable to think that within 2 weeks, you should be able to get it to me. I personally think that's a bit lenient, because there's a lot of things that, man, if you can't produce it within 24 hours, I really question how well your information security program is performing. But at the same time, I also acknowledge that people have day jobs. We don't want to be interrupting people's day jobs, defending the enterprise, simply for the audit. Audit doesn't rule all. We are trying to help the organization move forward, and they can't move forward if we are monopolizing everybody's time with audit activities. So we're definitely trying to blend there. And then also, from a time standpoint, one of the keys is setting aside time. Now, it's a pretty universal concept here. If you don't set aside time for it, and you don't dedicate time to it, is it going to happen? No. Because it's extraordinarily easy to procrastinate the things that you don't want to do. And often, audit activities are things people don't want to do. It may not be the fun part of their job, but it's a very important part of the job. So setting aside time. When I talk to clients about how to, kind of what are the lessons learned of your engagement, I often ask them. One of my clients last year, before I did a presentation, he said, the most important thing is setting aside my time and blocking that time and not letting other things bleed over into that time. He said, I block 2 hours every day to focus on nothing but this audit. And the benefit of that is when I do that and I work on a little bit of it every day, I'm able to maintain my cadence and I'm able to get everything done in a reasonable amount of time. And he stays happier and more satisfied as a result of that. So the key there is setting aside that time and not letting other things take over. Now, if something does start to take it over, that's where you have to go back to some of these other points. You have to escalate to management. Do you need additional help? Does management need to reprioritize tasks that are assigned to you? Things like that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here and see if there are any questions. Now the key is, it can be any audit related question. Again, you're not my clients. If you're looking for an auditor, I'd be happy to talk, but more importantly, I love talking about auditing and helping clients in their auditing experiences. Are there any questions? Sure.
How do you balance the need of say, hey, I need that clean SOC audit so my customers don't question me versus I want the audit to be deep, I want them to find things we can improve?
Yeah, so depending on the type of audit, there's different ways that the results can be presented. Your language that you're using is specific to like a SOC 1, SOC 2 audit. One of the keys there is that within a SOC audit, there's something called a management letter. It typically accompanies the audit report, but is not part of the formal audit report. So if I see things that need to be addressed, but I don't feel rise to the level of being some sort of exception, I can include it in the management letter. There's also a component where you're talking about exceptions are a sign of a quality audit. They should not be something that is feared because, just like these gentlemen over here said, what if he finds that one time that we didn't process? I had a situation last year where because somebody didn't get onboarded correctly with access to a data center, when they were offboarded, their access didn't get terminated because nobody realized that person had access. Well, guess what? In the 25 out of 300 people, I found that guy during my testing. Now, in that case, that was an exception. Compare that to something I had a couple weeks ago. I was doing more data center audits, and I had two scenarios. One was on the generator yard, there was a padlock that wasn't locked. So technically, the generator yard was not secured. Now, if you looked at it from 10 feet away it would look locked, because it was literally just not closed. And then we also found that across their 10 data centers, they had 6 cameras that weren't operable. Now, of those 10 sites, they have something like 300 cameras. So I mean, 6 is a very small number from that standpoint. So in that case, we put some of those things in the management letter, whereas sometimes we put it as an exception. A big part of it is also educating management and educating the receiver of your report. It's like, look, there are going to be things that happen. The other thing to add there is that at the end of those audit reports, management does have the ability to respond. We don't audit their response, but they're allowed to have that response in there. Does that answer your question? So the key is, your auditor should have a conversation with you. That's always a conversation between us and our clients, talking about the context. Go ahead.
This is kind of broad, but constantly thinking about situations like we had with LastPass, where I've gone through their SOC 2, I've read everything that I can about the organization, and yet we find out later on they had all these big glaring issues because they customized their scope to make sure that people didn't look at things, or they got an auditor who just phoned it in and didn't care. I know that's a really big topic. Do you have any insights on how we can spot stuff like that ahead of time?
Well, I think a big part of it is, really more than anything, you should be trying to assess the security culture of the entity that you're interacting with. SOC 2 reports should not be viewed as the be-all, end-all in any way. Primarily because SOC 2 is not a centrally managed standard. So the thoroughness and the quality of that audit report is tied to the firm that is issuing it. Now, we all know that there are huge differences in terms of how diligent is my auditor? How thorough is my auditor? How well does my auditor even know my technology? Things like that. So I would say that receiving an audit report should address a high level of expectations that they are meeting. But a carte blanche, oh, we have your SOC 2, we don't need to ask you anything else. There should certainly be a risk-based third-party risk management program in place that's saying, okay, we'll give you credit for this because we got this audit report from you, but these things we really need to understand. And in that type of situation, your third-party risk program should also have some sort of process in place so that when those types of breaches and things like that occur, you are able to act something else. It's like, oh, now we need to do a more effective review of that entity and go from there. Again, sometimes it's really challenging. Perfect case in point. SolarWinds. I never audited SolarWinds, they were never a client of mine, but I audited lots of people who had them as a product. And I can tell you that as an auditor, they were always horrible to deal with. They wouldn't answer any questions from an information security standpoint. They weren't supportive of their clients' security practices. So when they had their incident, I was not the least bit surprised. Be like, oh, that was one of the worst companies I've ever dealt with. That totally makes sense. So I mean, a lot of it comes back to security culture. If they're not going to support you in the process you're going through, you should definitely think twice about that. Any other questions?
So you brought up third-party risk questionnaires or stuff like that. So like, you go through, you do your SOC audit and all that, that's part of it. And you have to get those millions of assessments.
Yeah.
Is there anything an organization can do, like besides going and answering every single assessment?
Yeah.
What can an organization do to help alleviate that pressure?
Yeah. You mean stem the flood?
Yeah, like
questionnaires?
like you do like stakes, I know, and stuff like that. But.
Yeah, so having that is great. One of the things that I really encourage my clients to do is have a security packet or like a trust page that's ready with that information that they can provide. And so I spent a bit of time as a vCISO during my career, and what I typically did is I tried to have a security packet put together, and it contained high-level network diagrams, high-level data flow diagrams. It had the executive summary for our most recent pen test, high-level information security policy, and some other materials that are relevant to what they did, and we would provide that. And if they sent us a questionnaire that, duplicated that, in the questionnaire, I would often just put this is answered in the SOC 2. And I would maybe even put the control reference. Or I would say what document I provided them that answered that. And then I'd say, after you review that, if you still have questions, let me know. And if they came back with like, oh, you have to do a questionnaire, then I'd be like, okay, well, let's get on a phone call then and work through this. And I found that while that didn't alleviate all the pressure, it resolved it in at least half of the cases. And that saves, if you could answer 50% less questionnaires, would you be happy? Yeah, I think everybody would. Especially since they're all the same questionnaire for the most part. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Cool.
Enjoy your lunch.
Lunch is gonna be in the big training hall, just where we started.